Hello, friend. So, in this episode, I talked to Daniele Bolelli. He's a professor of history in the States, the host of two podcasts, The Drunken Taoist and The History on Fire. And he has recorded hundreds of podcasts. And if you like history, I highly recommend you listen to the History on Fire podcast, since he puts about 200 hours of research into each of the episodes. So, what I also learned is that I really enjoyed talking to martial artists, right? I think there's something about them. I'm not really sure what it is exactly, but we align on many levels already. So the conversation just flows more easily, I guess. And, Daniele has been on many podcasts like the Joe Rogan Experience. And thus, I was very grateful that I could also pick his brain for a bit. We talked about various interesting topics. Check out the show notes if you want to see if that podcast is for you. How Marcus Aurelius and Miyamoto Musashi lived 2000 years apart, but yet both had very similar approaches to their stoic principles. We also talked about the similarities of the Bushido and Kung Fu, the principles of Taoism and the application in Chinese medicine. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please subscribe and leave a review if you haven't already. And now let's jump right in. Ciao Daniele.
Eccoci qua.
Perfect. Look, I've listened to you on a different podcast a couple years ago,
Mhm.
and even though I mean, deep down, I probably knew I was going to do a podcast at some point. But if I decided to do it, I wanted to have you on. So back then, I did this mental note. I was like, okay, I have to talk to this guy if I do a podcast. So I think now maybe 5 or 6 years later, here we are. So thank you for taking the time. It's going to be a special one for me, for sure.
Thanks for having me. Power of intention, right? Sometimes you stick
Yeah.
with something and before you know it, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's an interesting topic. I mean, manifestation goes so many ways, but oftentimes when we try to force it, then it doesn't work out, right?
And there's
But
something to be said about,
let's start. Yeah, go for it.
oh, sorry, I was saying there's something to be said about just discipline, right? When you keep something in your mind and stick with it and you want to make it happen, it's like, yeah, maybe the timing is not right, maybe the pieces are not there, but I have a bunch of things like that I have in mind at one point, and then I make them happen 10 years later or something, and it takes a while, but it still get done.
Yeah, who would have thought, that we have to like do podcasts to talk to cool people, right? At some point. I mean, yeah, I don't know, where were you like these past couple of years? Were you in the US all the time?
Yeah, I've been living outside of Los Angeles, about hour and a half outside of Los Angeles. I'm in Ojai, California.
Ah, okay, nice. That's like Santa Barbara, right? Like that way up there.
Yeah, yeah.
Perfect. So, yeah, amazing. I mean, why do you think people are so reluctant to actually learn, history and learn from it, right?
I think there are multiple issues. One, in terms of just the most basic approach, so much of history is presented in a really dry, tedious, boring way that most people are like, "Pff, I don't want to be back in a boring high school class. I don't want to do this. Why?" So there's that. Not only boring, but often the feeling when it's that boring is that it's completely irrelevant to people's life. So that why should I bother? Why should I hear about this story? Why? It just doesn't seem important to somebody's life. Now, when people do actually bother and they do find something they like and they are learning it, and at least in a knowledge kind of sense, being able to apply it, of course, is a whole different game. Because first, a lot of history doesn't necessarily teach you lessons; it gives you facts on which to draw something. But in many cases, that's not what historians do. But even if, people's emotion, people's psychology, people often overrides whatever thing rationally they put in their brain, thinking, oh, this is a useful piece of information. It's I was thinking about it. I was listening to Dan Carlin yesterday when he did this bonus episode about the Holocaust, and he was talking about how sometimes, the very people who are very hardcore on a topic are completely blind to their own adopting the same type of mentality of dehumanizing other people. And the thing is, in some cases, is normal. You think like, let's say you are part of a particular group and somebody is attacking your group. So you feel like, okay, this is a threat to us as a group. So now, before you know it, you don't go just to, oh, person A, B, and C who attacked us are at fault and we need to defend ourselves. It starts becoming, yeah, sure, person A, B, and C, but they have families, they have support, they have these. And before you know it, you start painting it in all black and white terms. It's like it's all of those guys. And people do it all the time. That's why group identities is both something that human beings crave and is also something that really messes up human beings.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, especially these last couple of years, right? Like if I grew up in Germany, and once I've seen once I saw what happens, like around me, neighbors snitching on the other neighbor because they have like friends over, right? And
Yeah,
calling the Gestapo on them, like holy shit, like
yeah,
people really didn't learn anything from history, right? Like it's the pattern is there, it's clearly visible,
yeah.
and it's just, a different epoch, or maybe it isn't, and just so blind, right? Which it was mind-boggling to me. Like it opened my eyes for sure, who I'm surrounded with, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, it's wisdom as a whole is a hard thing. It's like applying certain principles, even the ones that you or I can recognize and like and love, and in our best moment we're able to embody. Then there are other moments where we don't embody them, and it's like, why? I haven't changed my belief system. I still feel the way I did, but there are other factors at play. I mean, I remember when my daughter was little, there was such a mirror that would be put in front of me because I would suddenly, she would do something and I'm getting all upset and raising my voice. And I'm like, why? Because a 2-year-old spilled milk. What the hell is wrong with you? You're like, you're priding yourself on, oh, I'm going to be nice and sweet and always supportive. But now you're stressed. Now you haven't slept in too long. Now something else. And just a little stimulus make your whole philosophy goes down the drain. And that's always a very useful reminder that holding certain values in your head is not the same thing as embodying those values in day-to-day life constantly, because that's the other thing. You can embody them when everything is going great and it's like, oh, good job, nice. But the test comes when pressure is on, where things are not good, where things are rough, and then how you deal with it.
Yeah.
That's another level. That's your black belt level of embodied philosophy.
Yeah, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face, right? So
The idea. That's exactly the idea.
yeah, yeah, I understand the child thing. Like for me, I had exactly that journey these past couple of years with my son.
Yep.
It wasn't just a mirror, it was more also like an amplifier, right?
Mhm.
Like
Yep.
that's what I, learned these last couple of months. Like he doesn't just show me what I am, but like even like these tiny bits that I'm not aware of,
Yep.
right? Like he just amplifies that, and then I see it in him, and then I get annoyed with him, but actually, right, I have to do the work with myself and on myself. Yeah, it's crazy
Yep.
stuff. I mean, that's, I think fatherhood is a special one,
Hmm.
and I mean, it brings us so much further, right? Like you talk about like building character a lot, right? All these kind of things. Like I think that's the ultimate catalyst for us men.
100%, 100%, because it's not, it's gonna test you in a bunch of ways, and the reality is that a kid doesn't really have a fault. They are a bunch of instincts, and they are so, whereas in day-to-day life we can always find a justification of like, oh well, so and so was behaving horribly, and that's why I reacted this way, or oh, you with a kid is like, no man, it's just all you. There's no, you cannot blame a
Yeah.
2-year-old for stuff.
Um. Yeah. I mean, that's exactly it. It's on so many levels. You either learn, or you go back to your cocoon and put your head in the sand. I've seen it I just moved a couple years ago. I mean, during the mask thing, I moved to a very small town out of the
Mhm.
city. I lived in many big cities before, and
Yeah,
it's just like once you do that, right? Like you actually have the time to look yourself in the mirror. I think when you have all these distractions around you all the time, and there's an event every night, you can go there. You meet up with
yeah,
people, and then you think you're doing it for work, but actually it's just distraction, right? Like you will never find the essence, and, and
yeah,
and what you actually like should be doing.
yeah.
Yeah,
I agree completely. It's there's something to be said
yeah,
for. It's a weird thing because living in small places, of course, you have less human interaction in terms of you have less people to pick from. At the same time, is interesting because it gives you everything is slower, everything more mellow. It's less noisy. It's less. So you have more time to sit with yourself in a way. And there's something very valuable about that. I have the same thing. I grew up in cities all my life, and now I live in a small town, and I kind of like it.
yeah, yeah. I mean, at least with me, like the older I get, the more I prefer just
Mhm.
stillness, and
Yep, yep,
because like my brain was always jumping, and I got that hyperactivity label like super early on, and
mm,
it's just then you look for distractions because you think that's the only way you can get focused, right? And then you're already in that stupid loop that
yeah.
doesn't get you anywhere. That makes everything worse in the end. Yeah, but and then you try to meditate and it doesn't work, obviously, and then everything else is at fault. It's not you, right? Like, yeah, it's a funny one.
100%.
But yeah, that's the way it is. Yeah, like you are deep into martial arts as well. Like, when did you start with that? Was that in
I
you
started
know yeah,
training.
just talk about that.
I started training before I moved to US. I started training when I was 17 years old in Italy. And the first 4 years, I was just messing around a little bit here and there with it. And then around right about the time I turned 21 is when I got more serious about it. And then from that time on, it became, a regular part of my life.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, I think I started with judo when I was a kid. I just did it for like 2 years, I think, and then I was too fat. I was always fighting the big guys, and then I didn't survive. So, and then yeah, just a couple years ago, went back to Wing Chun a bit, and
Nice.
yeah, now I'm on Muay Thai because I've got a good coach here, so a little bit just working
Yeah,
with what I got. But yeah, it's good. Like for me, just it's all about the mental
yeah.
strength and the stability, and everything else follows that, right?
Muay Thai is a beautiful art. Actually, I like all of them, to be honest. Like just about every martial art, I find it fun. But Muay Thai is great. It's so fun. It's a little trickier with striking arts because unlike grappling, you can really do it in practice because, of course, otherwise you give brain damage to each other all the time. So it's an interesting line to walk because some people think sparring is just a less intense fight, and that's clearly not the way that I do it. It's much more minimal contact, very much about timing, having fun, play. And then if you want to go hard, you hit the pads or you get into a real match and you do it in the ring. But in training, they are pretty mellow, at least as far as contact goes. And I think that's a smart way to train because otherwise, too many people, even amateurs who are not like people are doing it as a hobby, they take way too much damage because they spar hard in the gym, and it's like that's just not the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah, I mean, it's the way it is. The younger we are, the more stupid we are, and then you have your
Mhm.
first couple of big injuries, and then start thinking about like doing it more intelligently. But yeah, it has to hurt first, right? Otherwise, we don't learn.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's go back a bit to understand like your journey a bit better. You born in Italy, right? And then your mother went to the States, and you kind of followed. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah. I moved to US when I was 18, and then I've been living here ever since. It's there are plus and minuses. There are things when I go back to Italy that I like a lot better about Italian culture, and then there are other things that I like better about living in US. It's sort of a trade-off. It's not a one place better than the other. It
Yeah.
really depends on where you're at in life, what your current priorities are, and all that stuff. Because it's honestly like I mean, there are plenty of things about living in US that I don't like, but at the same time, there are other things that I would never get to experience if I still lived in Italy. So it's kind of a trade-off.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, nice. And then you talk about like your grandfather Stelio, that he was like a big influence on you. Was that kind of like these stories that he told you, were they more or less the reason why you went into history, or was that
No,
just,
I think
for other reasons?
I went into history because I mean, I don't know why, but like if I have to guess, I grew up a lot with, I mean, first, like think about when I grew up, right? I was born in 1974. So that means that in my childhood, of course, there was no internet. TV was very limited
Mm,
because there were very few channels. I was an only child. There are no cell phones. There's no, so I spent a lot of time by myself, and spending a lot of time by myself meant reading a lot of books, playing a lot of my own, and reading books. And one of the things that I really enjoyed as a kid was having these books that were clearly made for kids, but they were very well made. They actually contained good info that was useful. They were illustrated book for kids about ancient civilizations. And I would get lost in them because you would read the thing, it was interesting, but then there would also be these beautiful drawings. And sometimes I would just have this page open and maybe the whole drawing took both pages and I would just be there and there would be so many details and studying this. Oh, this guy is going to the market doing this. And it would be a movie for me. It wouldn't be a book, right? I would just sit there and imagine what these people are doing and the interaction. And so I would run movies in my head seeing this stuff, and I found it highly entertaining. And because of that, probably I was then more interested in history than that.
mm. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, because I mean, the kids nowadays, I've seen it with people, outside, and I mean, my son, he doesn't have a screen in front of him, but I mean, literally, they're not even 1 year old, and they already put a screen in the trolley,
Yeah,
and like that's exactly, they miss that whole component of, like playing the magic in their head, right? Like there's no imagination anymore. Like I remember my dad reading me all these fairy tales, like all these stories, like these German,
yeah,
you know old stories, right? Like, and you just have that movie, right? Like you imagine what it looks like, and then 2 years later you imagine it in a different way, and then you get to school, and then all of a sudden books are a liability, right?
yeah, that's right.
Like it switches. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Especially, I mean, I remember history. The teachers, like me asking questions about, the different kinds of possibilities, why war started, and
yeah,
so on and so forth, right? Sit down, like get out of here, don't ask these questions. Like there's just one right and one truth,
yeah, yeah.
and shut up, right?
Makes sense. Yeah,
Yeah,
unfortunately, I mean, school it's how it is.
exactly.
It's like it's always. I don't know too many people who have amazing experiences in school where it's still better than no school. You know what I mean? It's like you look at sometimes, I think, I remember when I was 18 years old, and in Italy, they would have you do this thing where it's 3 days of physical exams and psychological exams that is all to, because basically military service was mandatory. So every single person
Mm,
who's born in that week goes to do the same thing. So every male in the city who's 18 at that. So you really got a cross section of society for real. And I grew up fairly poor. I definitely didn't grow up privileged. I attended public school. I was not insulated. And yet, when I
mm,
saw a real cross section of society, and I realized that what I considered crap in terms of school, I was like, I could spot people across the room of 100 people who are going to schools where they actually made you right and made, because a majority of the kids clearly, if they had any schooling at all, was abysmally bad. And I was like, whoa, what I took for granted, what I thought was the bare minimum and I didn't even like, it is actually not that bad. It's much worse than what it should be, but it's so much better than what it can be out there. So I was like, okay, I guess it's not as bad as I thought.
yeah, I mean, my experience was also, on the lower end for sure. I mean,
Yeah,
I didn't really study, just like, did everything just before the class or
Hmm.
on the side, and was basically looking for distractions all the time. Like was gaming a lot,
Yeah,
and yeah, just enjoying my free time basically, right? Like I was lucky, that I didn't have to study to get kind of okay grades, and
sure.
that probably just facilitated like the easy way through. But yeah, in the end, it was just kind of a waste of time, right? But yeah, I mean, that's I think we slowly get into these, and yeah, these new age possibilities, right? Where homeschooling gets more interesting, and where there's different kinds of ways that we can choose for our kids to actually learn stuff, right? Instead of going to this old school
Sure.
indoctrination system.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's one of those like regular school comes with its major sets of problems. Homeschool is tricky because it really depends on who's doing it, right? It's like if the parents are absolutely brilliant and they are able to make sure that there's still a social network around the kids so that they have friends and then it can be fantastic. Of course, there's a whole bunch of parents who are like, ooh, I thought the teacher at school was terrible and boring. Now this is the people teaching them. Oh my God, this is not. So, it's like with any, it's kind of like what I was saying about Italy and US, right? Advantages, disadvantages. The advantages, disadvantages are magnified depending on who's involved, the specific situation in a specific point in time. That's why it's hard to generalize. It's not that regular school is always better. It's not that homeschooling is always better. It really depends on the
Yeah,
kids, depends on the parents, depend on the specific timing, and a bunch of other factors.
sure. Yeah, I mean, in the end, I don't see my role as a parent to teach my child everything, because I'm just not good at everything, right?
Sure.
So I think my position is more to find the right people to teach it to my
Sure.
child, right? Like, so
Yeah.
that's a possibility of the internet, right? Just kind
Yeah.
of a connector, and
Hmm.
put them in front of the right people, and that's a screen time that I think is suitable and that makes any sense, rather than, right, like watching some stupid cartoons, right?
Definitely.
But yeah, exactly. So I mean, you have a podcast. You have two podcasts, as far as I've seen in these past months. And I mean, I've probably recorded 1% of your amount of episodes. So how how do you think that whole journey like influenced you right from the beginning? Can you pinpoint a few aha moments where you grew in a way that you wouldn't have expected beforehand?
I mean, my whole experience with podcasting kind of makes no sense in a way because it was so random and I mean, literally, I was like back in 2011, I didn't know what podcasts were. And because of a book I wrote, I found myself, my first two podcast experience were Adam Carolla and Joe Rogan. And of course, there's
Mm.
no logical reason why Rogan should have had me on. I don't even think he remembers or knows why he had me on. But of course, I found myself in the deepest end of the pool right away with like the most follow podcast in the world being a guest and then being called as a guest in a zillion other podcasts after that. So I was kind of
Mm.
thrown into this, like, I don't know that I would have gotten into podcast otherwise. Maybe not, but I was like, okay, this is like my main thing I've always wanted to be writing. Podcast, I was like, I guess. And so that's when even people were like, oh, you need to start your podcast. I was like, I don't really want to do that. I'm not so sure. And then I started and I was like, okay, this is a cool medium. There's something good that can be done with this medium. I like it as an alternative. And then when I got into History on Fire, because, my first one, Drunken Taoist, is more like a chatty interview kind of podcast. Whereas History on Fire is just me doing a deep dive into a particular historical topic and really researching it like crazy until I really know that topic well. And then I get to tell that story,
Mm.
just me. There's no dialogue, there's no interview, so I need to make it entertaining since it's just my voice going on for a while. And that's fun. That is a little bit like writing because it's a little bit like writing a mini book, but a little more energy to it, in the sense that you need to keep engaging the audience to make sure they don't get bored. So it's overall, I mean, I'm very glad. It's something could have never foreseen, because because there were no podcasts for me growing up, of course, but also because, yeah, I wasn't at the forefront by design. I kind of stumbled upon it by luck.
Yeah, I mean, just for me, I think I've done 10 or so so far, and it's crazy, like the growth I see with myself, just in the thought processes and just talking to a camera. And I sure it's a different thing, especially when you have to talk to the camera by yourself, right?
Yeah.
If it's not even an interaction, it's a different level. But yeah, I mean, to me, it's super interesting, and then every single time it's a different experience, especially since every guest is different, and the stuff I think about beforehand is always different, and it's super interesting for me, and I'll definitely keep going. So yeah, I mean, well done on a couple hundred podcasts. I mean, that's just
Yeah.
insane, crazy stuff. Okay, so you still doing the Drunken Taoist podcast, right? Taoist, and then History and
Yeah,
Fire,
Drunken Taoist is
both
a
of them.
couple of times a month, and yeah, we are at, I forget, like 250 plus podcast of Drunken Taoist,
Mm,
and then History on Fire have over 100 episodes, and that one is more like one a month, because it takes so much time and energy to research and put together that even one a month is
mm.
pushed. But yeah, there's yeah, that one too is a little over 100 episodes.
Yeah, because you said you put like 200 hours of research into
Yeah,
topics
it's pretty
sometimes,
much,
right?
yeah, it's pretty much a full-time job. It's just a lot
Crazy.
of work, because you need to really know it. I mean, actually, you don't. There are some podcasts that I've listened that do history that do very much a Wikipedia version, right? They clearly haven't read that
Mm.
much. They'll read Wikipedia, they'll read a couple of articles, they prepare it in 3 days, then they talk about it for half an hour. And don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with that approach. It's if you want the Wikipedia version of history, those are the right podcasts. They give you a very quick skimming introduction to a topic, and you're out. If you do, what I do is extremely research intensive, because I really study the story from every angle and read multiple books. And so by the time I put it together, I usually understand the story 100 times better than I thought I did when I first started, which inevitably means it's a lot more work.
Yeah, I mean, it's a standard that you set for yourself, right? That
Yeah.
you want excellent work, and that's why you put it out. Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting. How much do you think of the stuff that we actually get taught in school is bullshit,
I
like in
guess
in a history
depends where
perspective?
you go. Depends where you go, of course. And sometimes it may not be bullshit in a intentional kind of way. Sometimes it's like, if I tell you the history of whatever, pick any topic, in 5 minutes, inevitably it's gonna be a little bit bullshit, because I'm leaving out so much, I'm oversimplifying so much. Because if I have to qualify every statement and say, oh, he did this because of this reason, well, but also there was other this reason, and this reason was, it start getting so nitpicky that before you know it, you're talking about it for 3 zillion hours. So it's
Mm.
sometimes just the time frame forces you to, is not necessarily a lie, but it oversimplified dramatically the history of the whole thing. And I think that's where, like, when I teach classes in university, I like to do both, where I'll do a quick skimming overview of all the material we need to cover, because it's a lot and there's no way we can dedicate much time to each aspect. But then maybe I'll pick one or two things that I'll have them do a super deep dive, listening to podcasts, really researching, and looking at that one story that we could have covered in 5 minutes in class. Now they spend 8 hours on it. And of course, it acquires a whole different level of depth and texture to it. It becomes so much more interesting. But you can't do it with every topic, or you don't get anywhere in a semester. You have to. So it's a balancing act between skimming through stuff, kind of get the bird eye view of history, and then diving deep and really getting to a level where it becomes much more interesting, because now you're looking at individuals, not just as history, as broad forces Now you're looking at individuals and their values, their priorities, and all that.
Yeah, interesting. So you have students that specifically study history, or is that part of like a
Yeah.
business context
No,
at point? And yeah,
I teach in university. That's one of the things I do is I teach history in university out here.
nice. Okay, okay. Yeah, I mean, what I also meant before with like the term bullshit. It's like, to me, you have, just like you said, it's just a little tiny tweak, right? But it's like on purpose, right? Like it's tweaked, and so the whole thing just turns out completely 180 degrees.
Yeah, and I think there are one of the things I tell my student is there are two kind of biases in history. There's an intentional bias and unintentional one. The intentional one is avoidable. The intentional one is you are a terrible historian if you go down that path, which is basically you already have a preconceived conclusion of where what you want students to get, what you want students to believe, maybe because of your politics, maybe because of your religion or no religion or whatever that is. And so you tweak all the facts to kind of make your philosophical conclusion be the correct one. And you're essentially lying, right? Because you're tweaking evidence to make it go always in one direction. That's an intentional bias and it's very bad. The unintentional one is unavoidable. And that's the one where, just by virtue of choosing where you shine the spotlight, where you spend more time talking about, where you simply know more, whatever you like best, inevitably you're going to know more, be more passionate, and put more time and attention on it. There's the unintentional bias that sometimes we just don't have the sources for a particular topic, so we know this much about it. There's only so much you can talk about it, not because it's not interesting or important, but we just don't have the evidence for it. So the unintentional one is completely unavoidable, right? You can be as honest as possible about your likes and dislikes, where you choose to shine the spotlight, but that one is a hard one to skip. The bad one, as you're saying, is when people intentionally are tweaking evidence, because that's not history anymore, that's propaganda.
Yeah, how freely were you able to talk about like all these topics? Did you ever have like an issue and with your work, like
No, no, nobody really
no,
bothered me.
easy?
Students are fine. I
Yeah,
never had a problem of any kind.
nice.
And the thing
So
is,
then
I should
you
qualify
went, yeah,
I should add one thing. And it's not that to be taken for granted, because there's a bunch of topics I cover that are extremely sensitive. There's a whole range of topics where I don't pull punches. I'll say exactly what I think about a particular issue. So the potential for things to go wrong has always been extremely high, but I never had a problem, neither from administration, neither from students. Students, I think one thing they like is that I'm not trying to shove a hard opinion down their throat, because no matter how opinionated I may be, is always an opinion that allows for 10,000 exceptions. That's not, I guess the way to say it is that it's not ideologically driven. I'm not trying to sell them on an ideology. I can have a specific conclusion about a specific event, but I'm not trying to sell them on every single time this is the way things work and that's the interpretation due to, again, either politics or religion or something. It's not like that. And I think in that sense students have less of a problem than if you were trying to convert them to one way of looking at the world.
I mean that's how teachers should be, right? Like
Yeah.
that's how leaders should be. Like people should follow you, without force,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's especially, I think, in the German school system, it goes completely the other way, right? Like you have to believe this one ideology, you have to believe this one way of thinking. Everything else is wrong, and if you talk about it, you get penalized, right? So
Right.
the the situation in Yugoslavia, right? If you would, when Yugoslavia got pulled apart, do you want to talk about that a little bit? Like, how was your viewpoint on that, and what were the drivers?
Are we talking about like the 1990s when
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things that I've read more than the average person on the topic, but I also quickly understood that it was really damn complicated issue. That to really know it, I would like the amount of work and research I would have to do was way more than what I've done. So I've never really been to a place where I'm like strongly opinionated on, because I've always felt that my grasp of that was the Wikipedia version. My grasp on that particular topic was somewhat superficial. So I understood the basic dynamics, but not to any level that I feel like, oh yeah, I get it, I understand the whole. It's like I never felt that way regarding the whole. And it was a history happening live because it was happening, and as I was a teenager, and that's when that stuff was going down in a big way, and in the years afterwards. But yeah, even though it was just across the Adriatic Sea, I was like, I get it and I don't.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting topic. I mean, I got the influence to my mother's side, right? She's from Croatia, and
Mm.
through the years when I was younger, like the story that I was told early on was completely wrong, right? Like the older I got, the more I learned about geopolitics, and the more I actually understood what really went on, and
Yep.
the real thing is not talked about. I mean, that's for sure, right? So yeah, interesting. But yeah, I mean that's just the way it is. The winner writes the story, right? It's his story. So I always like to say that. So yeah, I guess it's the way it is these days. Yeah. So the the segue maybe here to kung fu, to the samurai. You also talk about that like a lot.
Sure.
I don't know. Maybe we can just go into the Bushido a bit, and I like the Stoicism as well. Maybe we can see about the similarities there.
Yeah, I mean, I did a couple of episodes that, oddly enough, sort of led me to the same conclusions. I did a two-part series about Marcus Aurelius, and I did a two-part series about Miyamoto Musashi. So, one guy lived like over 1,000 years before the other in ancient Rome. The other guy lived in Japan at the beginning of the Tokugawa dominance on Japan. And both of them have a very stoic approach to life. In Marcus Aurelius, in a more literal sense, stoic. In Musashi, of course, you wouldn't use those terms, but when you look at his value system, was very stoic in nature. And it was interesting because that was a very rare case where in both times I start thinking that I'm going to have a certain take on the topic. And then the more I research, the more I change my mind. In the sense that I do think that both Marcus Aurelius and Musashi have some fantastic things they bring to the table. However, both of those guys, they feel so damn stern in their approach. They take stoicism to such an extreme of just don't rely on anybody, don't need anybody, don't take pleasure in anything, no attachment, nothing matters, just your duty. And I'm just like, who cares? Like, have fun in life. Jesus, man. It's like stoicism is supposed to help you navigate through life, not be this thing that's becomes almost pleasure denying in its. I understand not being a slave to pleasure. I get that, but there's a difference between not being a slave to pleasure and sort of looking down on the whole thing. And so in both those guys' cases, I like them a lot better when I started the research. And the deeper I got into it, the more I felt that I could see how something that's a virtue that I appreciate of certain Stoic values could be taken too far to a place where, in my way of looking things, is not that human anymore. It kind of misses the point by the end because it's not something that just helping you live a better life. It becomes its own way of perceiving everything. And so that was kind of the vibe I got. None of them struck me as the kind of guys I would want to hang around to have fun, or that they even knew much
Yeah,
what fun was.
yeah. I mean, I understand that I mean, if we just look at us, right? Like we have that masculine and the feminine, right? Like we cannot always be,
Yeah,
fully on the masculine side. Like sometimes we have to, get our feminine out, and especially with children. And
yeah,
a lot of situations in our daily lives, right? Like it makes no sense to be so stern in one direction all the time. It's just not going to work. But like, do you think that what you basically studied and that it like took you, further in that one direction where you said, okay, they only believe that one side is the right side? Is that, don't you think that's a little bit because, the way, stories are being told and stuff is being taken away so that that one kind of, direction is being, right, like stuck to?
I mean, hard to tell, right?
Could
Because
be, right?
there's no, I mean,
Yeah.
all you got is the evidence that we have. And the evidence that we have, of course, even about whole person life, there's only so much. So who knows? Maybe the guy was totally different. Now, the only thing that makes it a little raises some question is that because with both of those guys, we actually have their writings. So it's not just we hear their story from somebody else, but we
Mm.
actually have them writing. Granted, whatever Marcus Aurelius wrote or whatever Musashi wrote is clearly a small portion of their way of approaching life, living life, engaging with life. So maybe there was a lot more that they brought to the table. It definitely doesn't show up in the writings. In the writings, they look like extremely stern individual, very efficient, very disciplined. There's no argument about that, and those are clearly good values. But also, yeah, I'm not sure that like a lot of the time when reading their stuff, the question that always pops up in my head is kind of what's the point? Why be so efficient and disciplined? What's the point of doing it if then you're this dour joy killing vibe that you carry with all the rest of your writing? It's like discipline, if it leads to that, might as well be undisciplined at that point. It's like I don't value, to me, discipline, efficiency, toughness, strength, those are virtues in the measure that they lead to create something good in life. If they are an end on themselves, I don't see the point. And to me, when your overall energy is one that like you've never been able to take a joke or make a joke in your life, I'm beginning to question your philosophy there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I agree. I mean, if if we overdo anything, then it's definitely not the right way. Like I think balance is key with all we do, and especially with martial arts and you know these type of topics. The what I also found interesting is like they align on a lot of stuff, right? But then they come from completely different ends of the world, right? Like different epochs. Like why do you think that is?
I think certain things are human universal. Certain things are the same way why some of the same patterns show up in human beings in a positive way or in a negative way. It's human psychology that when there are only so many ways to respond when faced with life problems. And so I'm not surprised that the same conclusion can be drawn under different names in very different cultures and times. Because life problems don't change. People still get sick, they still get old, they still die, they still face loss and heartbreak. Those are constant in life at all places, all times. So, yeah, I'm not all that surprised to see the same ideas pop up in different places. By the same token, you were talking about balance. If you think about, if you read the tiny bit there's left of his writings of the Greek philosopher Heraclitus, if you look at Heraclitus
Mm.
and you look at Lao Tzu, the mythological founder of Taoism, it's basically the same. It's like they say you could take statements from one, put them in the other's book, and it would flow seamlessly. And one guy was living in Greece and one guy was living in China, clearly a world apart, and yet almost identical conclusions. And so I'm like, okay, there are certain things that are almost archetype. There are energies that are found everywhere. Some cultures may encourage them more than others, but I think at an individual level, people can stumble there from in all times and all places.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in the end, when you sit still and let's say you meditate, there's only so much that can come up. Sure, there's levels to it, right? I mean, I have probably only touched to the absolute like base of it, and I'm fairly a novice in it, but you know, the longer I do it, the more I can see that it's something that I want to stick to.
Yeah,
But yeah, I guess that the same thoughts pop up, right? Like you know, when you ground, like we're connected on the same ground in the end, right? Like there has
yeah.
to be similarities in the end. You talk in Taoism, you also talk about how it translates into Chinese medicine.
Hmm.
Can you elaborate a bit on that? Because that interests me. You know,
Yeah.
like my father, he's also into acupuncture. And like I grew up with that, so it's definitely an interesting topic for me.
Yeah, Taoism to me is as interesting as a philosophical system can get, because unlike just about any philosophical system that usually you need to be schooled in one particular way of thinking to then come to those conclusions. Taoism, even more the stuff we were saying applying to Taoism, because Taoism is really based on like looking at the way nature works and drawing a philosophy based on understanding nature, understanding humanity, balance, and things like that, that are very much universal. So, in a sense, you don't really need to have read Taoism to be a Taoist in some ways, to live your life according to
Yeah.
Taoist principles. So, because it's the principle of Taoism can be applied to pretty much anything, whether how to raise your kids, to
Mm.
communication, to run a nation, to cook food, to heal, to in medicine, in martial arts, you name it. Because those principles, and again, I don't want to, I almost don't, I was tempted to throw a couple of examples, but there's so much that I don't want to oversimplify it. But there are, certain ideas regarding, for example, what you were saying regarding balance, regarding the notion that our whole life is based on any topic you can think of. There's usually one side of a topic, another side of the topic. There's the very yin yang dynamics that Taoism recognizes of the opposites. But whereas Western culture and religions have framed opposites as in moral terms, as like good and evil, God and the devil, yin yang is not like that. It's more like cold and hot, man and woman. It's more like it's not that one is good and one is bad. It's there's a range there. There's a continuum between heat and cold, and there's a balance there that is not always in the middle either. Taoism is arguing that the right balance is completely dependent on context. So in one particular
Mm.
context, you want to be on maybe you're 70-30 leaning to one side, but if you want life's circumstances are constantly changing. And so the Taoist talent is to be able to take these two opposite and figure out the right balance in between, depending on each one of life circumstances. And it's because it's constantly changing, you have to be ready to constantly adapt your balance. For example, when you talk about parenting and raising kids, first you need to see what kid you have in front of you. Is this a kid who thrives more on freedom or thrives more on discipline and following rules? Because it's not good or bad one approach or the other. It's different kids have different needs. And so you can apply the right philosophical system for one kid, but you apply to the wrong kid, and now it's the wrong philosophical system. You know what I mean? Is like now you're giving a ton of freedom to a kid that craves structure. There's nothing wrong with giving freedom, but you're giving it to the wrong kid. And then being able to figure out the balance, because maybe as they grow old, their things start changing a little bit. Maybe so to constantly be able to adapt your communication, your teaching, what you expose them to what you have in front of you, not what you just think should be right, but to really understand, okay, now I've gone a little too hard on the discipline, and now let's get the foot off the gas pedal and let's go a little easier. Let's encourage more freedom and creativity and relax and play. Now we're getting a little having too fun to the point that we're getting lazy. Okay, let's bring it back to so, and it's a constant game of tweaking that balance. That's Taoism in a nutshell in terms of, I mean, of course, there's a ton more, but that's one big aspect of Taoism. So when it comes to things like healing or medicine, never mind that the whole theory of chi and the energy flowing through the body is based on Taoist ideas, but the very notion of like a huge cornerstone of Chinese medicine is the idea of balance, that the body is healthy when all the energies are flowing freely and you find the right balance. But because balance is dynamic, it can be affected by life circumstances. Something comes in to throw you off balance, and it's the job of the physician to find a way to restore balance within that particular system, which also affects the whole body as a complete thing. And so much of the theory revolves around how do we affect this balance? How do we do these things that bring you back to a natural state of health? You know, and you know, you find the same thing in martial arts. You find, for example, one big thing that Taoism emphasizes is the between the yin and yang is the yin energy. Not because yang is bad, but because yang is obvious. Everybody understands strength, toughness, you know, this obvious manifestation of power. Whereas yin is much more subtle, it's much more so they put more attention there because most people don't get it. So, for example, in martial arts, it's understood that if you are stronger, more powerful, you can just pick up the other guy, throw him across the room. That's a very yang thing to do. A yin thing to do would be, you know, you push them, they push you with 3 times as much force. They are winning the contest as force. And then you use their push, kind of in perfect judo, right? You use their push to throw them right in the direction where they are pushing you. You switch the angle a little bit and use their energy to throw them in a way that if they were perfectly still, you wouldn't be able to throw them the same way. You're able to throw them because they are pushing you. And so it's a way to use yin energy to get the job done. So things like that are one of the reasons why I find Taoism endlessly fascinating, because it applies to literally everything. You can apply Taoist principle to every single aspect of life.
Yeah, that's a beautiful part about it because it gives you practical help, right, with life.
Yeah.
You know, like just what you explained with you know, taking the energy is like the little bit that I was able to practice Wing Chun that just fascinated me so much. You know, like you literally look for the sweet spot. You know, you take in the energy of the opponent, you redirect it, and you just created like so much force, which is absolutely mind-boggling. You know, like if you haven't experienced it yourself, then you wouldn't believe it. But
Yeah.
that's so beautiful about it. Yeah, but to touch upon what you said before, I mean that's a little bit the problem with religion, right? Like it doesn't really give you the freedom, I would say, to decide for yourself, you know, what's right and wrong, right? Like there's very much, you know, one linear way to get to the end point, and you know, on the right side everything's green, on the left everything is red, right? Like I don't know, I always had that little issue with these kind of approaches in life, right?
Well, and I think there's a reason why political philosophy, religions gravitate toward dogma. It's because dogma is simple. Dogma is easy. You find something that works at one point in time in one specific situation, you fall in love with it because it worked for you that one time in that situation, and now you want it to be something you can turn to every time because hey, I found it, we can use it in every, and it's like, no, you found it, good job in that situation. In a different situation you need to change it, you need to maybe do something radically different. And so the problem is that dogma is reassuring because it's telling you if you just do ABC, if you follow the leader, if you believe these things, everything is going to work out and all life's problems are going to be solved. It feels very solid, much more solid than telling people, good job that you figured it out today. Tomorrow is a new battle. You have to figure it out all anew and find a new balance and do the job again. That's a lot of work and is asking people to have a lot of confidence in their ability to make the right call consistently, time and time again. A dogma, you only have to make the right call once, and then you, never mind that it's not true and it's a lie, but you have this belief that now you can just follow it and it's going to work every time, which is simply, again, is not the case, but is psychologically reassuring. It appeals to our laziness, it appeals to our insecurities, it appeals to a whole set of things of which human beings are packed with. Whereas ability to flow, that's a really hard skill, and they are asking a lot of people. That's why Taoism, in many ways, there's a bit of an elitist vibe in Taoism, and not an elitist as in only certain social classes or only. Taoism has very much this idea of like it's open to anybody, but let's be real. How many people are really gonna get it and be able to apply it on a consistent basis? Not that many. Not because just because talent is not distributed equally, and so your abilities are not going like in many cases there's this Taoist vibe of like how every philosophy or religion is trying to attract new people to them and recruit people. They, if anything, they kind of turn you away a bit. There's these things of like, why do you want to play with this stuff? This is complicated. You can get hurt. Just go study Confucianism. They'll give you simple rules of do this, don't do that, and you probably won't do too much damage with that. That's and so the which sounds horrendously anti-democratic, but life is not always fair that way. It's like the ability to read the situation, respond appropriately on a consistent basis, minute to minute, day by day, all the time. It's a hard skill, and yet that's what life is.
Yeah. Yeah, beautifully said. But I mean, what you said before, like this one way, right, that you are given, presented, right?
Yeah,
It's more controllable, right? That's what I wanted to add, because that just popped up in my head. I think, governments like control, and they don't want free thinkers, right? They don't want people just doing something on their own and moving in their own direction. And that's why obviously, it's built in a way where the thought process is it's free, right?
yeah,
It's
yeah, yeah.
it's but it's guided.
And I
So
think it's
yeah.
it's interesting because you're putting it from the government standpoint, and you're right. There's also the other standpoint of like, why do people flock to this type of thinking? Because it's not just bad,
Yeah.
evil James Bond villain manipulating them into obeying and following. It's
Mm.
people enthusiastically volunteering to have the strong man who tell them how to live because they did a daddy figure that regulate their life. I recently did a YouTube video, short one, like 9 minutes or something. I did a YouTube video called Why People Fall for Fascism," and to me, it's more of a psychological thing than anything. It's like it's because it's very reassuring. So a bunch of people are enthusiastically ready to trade freedoms and thinking and all of that to have some strong or seemingly strong person telling them, don't worry, we have it all figured out. These are our colors, these are our slogans, this is what you need to do, what you stay away from. Here is a prepackaged set of values that you buy into. Just follow, chant along, and we'll have it a good life. To people who have less than stellar self-esteem and trust in their creative abilities, it's a very appealing message. It's something that's why often, we think of dictators as just the bad guys, which of course they are, but they also the bad guys who fulfill a role that a bunch of people crave. They want dictators, they want cult leaders, they want somebody telling them what to do. And so it kind of it goes two ways in that regard. It's a perfect marriage between somebody who wants to rule and control and somebody who wants to be ruled and controlled.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, it wouldn't work if there weren't both sides, right, attracted to each other.
Yeah,
But what I always find interesting is like if you look at these last couple of years, they were beautiful in that sense, because I learned so much. I mean, but if you kind of give these types of people an alternative, right, and also a strong person to lead, and also valid arguments, and also, let's say, an easy way to switch to that other side, they still kind of refuse, right? And they because it's something new, right? Like new is always difficult.
yeah, and it's hard work. It's hard
Yeah.
work. And that's
Yeah.
why people like talking about parenting. They like the book that tell them. The 7 rules of parenting. Just do this with every kid every time, and everything is gonna work. And it's like, probably not. That's not how it's gonna work with some kids, and it's really not gonna work with others. because telling people, look, there are some rules, but they change depending on the person, depending on the context, depending on the time, depending on this. Now it means they have to think 10 times harder. And who wants to do that? It's like, can I just get the 7 rules of parenting book and just do that and nothing else? And it's like, again, it appeals to our laziness that way.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's a beautiful part about martial arts. I think, every kid should practice some form, right? Especially the boys. Because like you have these different kinds of situations and you have to find your way out of it, right? Like it's not always the same and it's always a little bit different,
Yeah,
and you are put under stress, and right, like you have to find yourself out of it, and you will build that confidence, right? Like you will
yeah,
build that character eventually, even though you get punched in the face in the beginning. I mean, I don't do jujitsu, but I know that you do it, and it's probably that's one of the hardest ones in the beginning, because
sure.
you're just like beaten up on the mat like constantly for a long period of time until you're like you get it right at some point, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah. 100%. And
definitely.
it's a good exercise in dealing with theory and reality. You drill the move. I got it. I just grab their arm and do that. And sometimes it's going to work exactly like that. But in order for that to work, a bunch of things need to fall into place. Other times it's not going to work. It's not that the move doesn't work, it's that you have to create a reality in which that move works at that time the right way. And that, of course, is not every moment, every time. And so you have to learn. I mean, Jigoro Kano, the creator of judo, very much based this art on Taoist principles. He was thinking about how can Taoist principles be the foundation for a martial art. And so that's what a lot of his judo was about.
Hmm. Yeah, nice. Like you have this quote, right? Throw me into hell and I'll find a way to enjoy it.
Yeah, that's Ikkyu
Like,
Sojun, Zen master from the 1400s. He's awesome. He's one of my favorite historical characters. He's so much fun. But he's no stranger to pain or hard times, but he still finds a way to just enjoy life. And I love that about him. He's a great, great guy.
yeah. I mean that if you kind of embrace that one, it teaches you so much, right? Like I think, if you don't go through that hardship, especially
Mhm.
us men, I mean, we learn so much when shit hits the fan, right? Like when we think nothing is going to work out anymore and everything breaks down, right? And then,
Yeah.
we have that Phoenix experience, and it's important, right? Like all these situations, when we kind of, yeah, roads of passage, for example, right? Like we call them, right? Like, did
Yeah.
you do you think that we need those back at some point?
I think rituals help people if done the right way. Of course, there are a bunch of rituals in many traditions and religions that are become so dead, so different from what people actually need. So it's interesting to, in a way, create new rituals that fit for you and your community and your people. Create rituals that appeal to a certain segment of the population. Yeah, I think rituals are important. They are an important thing to help you get through some psychological moments, get through life, really.
Yeah, maybe a segue here to the psychedelics of our world. Like, do you, through your studies, because I like, to me it's very difficult to find anything interesting and anything of value to read about, uh, that we have these psychedelic substances in Europe back in the day,
Yeah,
like the
yeah,
Celtic tribes and
yeah.
so on and so forth. I mean, I know they were using or it as medicine as well, just like in South and Central America. But like, have you stumbled across like anything that's interesting in that sense, and could you share that?
So, yeah, my experiences have been. I mean, people have used psychedelic substances since the dawn of time as part of religion, as part of exploration, as part of a lot of things. I very much like the theory. The practice has been very mixed for me, to say the least, because I've had some horrendous experience on psychedelics where he was. I remember, I remember doing mushrooms in a purely fun kind of way, and it was fun and enjoyable in a small amount, and it was all the colors and everything, and it was cool. And then I did it in a heavy way, like with massive amount in what was supposed to be a therapeutic context to really help me get through stuff that I was struggling with. And not only didn't get me to stuff I was struggling with, but if anything, it messed me up three times more because I mean, I was in a place where psychologically I was so far gone to this place of just complete mental breakdown, from which, sometimes you hear there's the part of the psychedelic journeys you hit this rough spot, it can't get any worse, so it just did. But then there's the whole other arc of rebirth and coming back out the other side. For me, it was like, it's horrible. No way, it got more horrible. Oh my God, can it get any more horrible? Yeah, it just did. Oh, and now there are 22 layers below. And after digging for 7 hours through layer of horror, then that's where it ends. Good luck, have fun. And you're like, wait, what happened to the whole other side of the so I think it's like, don't get me wrong, I think that psychedelics can do wonderful things for some people in the right context at the right time, but in many cases they have been sold as this cure-all that just take psilocybin, take mushrooms, take whatever, and is gonna heal you, and it's not like that. It's some people are get really messed up from it. Some people have a cool experience, but it doesn't translate into their daily lives. There's a whole range of possible reaction from very positive to very negative and everything in between. And I think a lot of people I know are very big psychedelic proponents tend to only focus on the super positive experiences. And I'm like, that's one part of the story. There's a lot, it's a bit more complicated than that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's for sure not for everyone, and not just that. I think it's for a small, fraction of humanity. I think it's suitable. Like you have to be, preparing for that in a very big way, and you have to do the work and specifically go into something, and then you have to do it with the right people, shaman, whatever you want to call them, and have proper guidance, and you have to be you have to do a cleanse beforehand, like depending on what you're doing.
Sure.
But I think just like you described it, like it can go really wrong, and a lot of people, they probably don't even have the mental fitness to pull themselves out of it afterwards, right?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. There are definitely people who, I mean, it's not a, definitely there are cases where it breaks them bad and there's no rebuilding afterwards. And yeah, it's rough. And I
Mm,
think that's also what pissed me off about it is that I went in a situation that was specifically designed, not as like, oh, random party where you took too much. It was specifically designed to be a therapeutic thing that would help you. There's a journey, there's a process, there's a guidance, there's all of that. And the
yeah,
result really couldn't have been any worse. And so I was just like, what the hell? And again, I'm not blaming the substance itself, but I'm saying it's not a cure for all. It's like, and so after that, I've been extremely sketchy on touching anything else because I got burned just a little too much.
mm, yeah, definitely happens a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
So did you read about, like, and let's pick the Roman Empire, maybe, like were they using it, like anything? did you
I mean,
did
I'm
you get
trying to
any
think
scriptures
ancient
about that?
Rome. I'm trying to think about ancient Rome, and nothing comes to mind about Rome. But honestly, I would be surprised because just about every culture has used, like, mind altering our minds, altering our perception is one of humanity's favorite pastimes. So just about every other culture finds something that they use to trip out and love it, and it's kind of a human universal. You find it in so many different cultures and times. And the drug of choice can change. It can be anything from
Sure.
alcohol to mushrooms to ayahuasca to you name it. But or even stuff that's like we would see as heavy, like think about opium, think about, you know, alteration of consciousness is something that just about every culture does in one way or another.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, we kind of accepted the alcohol as our
Sure.
go-to, right? Like,
Yeah.
especially, me growing up in Bavaria and then having also the Croatian side of the family, like it's just, you're from Italy, like it's normal, right? Like wine is there. It's there
Yeah.
for lunch. Our grandparents have it for lunch. It's normal, right?
Yeah.
And then we at least I grew up in in an environment where it was abused a lot, right? Like 14, 16, it's normal to get drunk on beer, right? Like in Munich especially. And yeah, it's an interesting one. So the I have another topic that I wanted to talk to you about, like, because I read a lot about biodynamics, and how deep do you think you have to, or how deep did you have to dig into scriptures like the Sumerian tablets? And because I know you look into those, and then the Hindu mythology, to like read about like higher beings, and that type of realm.
I haven't looked
Is
much
that
into it.
very hard to find, or
I
you
haven't
don't
really
know?
looked much into it.
So Steiner, is that interesting to you? Like Rudolf Steiner and
I
biodynamics,
mean, I've
and
heard
you
of
don't?
him, but I haven't really read his stuff much.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Nice. All right, man. That was good. Where can people find you? Like, just give a quick rundown on your podcasts and website or
Sure.
Instagram.
So, I have History on Fire podcast, the Drunken Taoist podcast. If you figure out by looking at those how to spell my name, you can Google it. I have like a link tree with links to just about everything from YouTube channels to Substack to podcast to you name it. So that's probably the best way to go.
Amazing. Like, how fast were you able to monetize your podcast? Was did that take a while?
Change over time. It's hard to tell because, I mean, in my case, I think it happened somewhat quickly, but I think there was a particular set of circumstances that may not be that easy to replicate. Like if I were to do it right now, I don't know that it
Mm.
would work the same way. So I think it was very specific to that time and place. But yeah, for me, it worked out fairly good. But I think I just kind of won the lottery a few times in a row there to make it happen the way it did.
Yeah. Yes, you got like sponsorships and members, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah, I
for
think it
your
was
written
because I
content.
was on Rogan show a lot, and so that changed things, but otherwise probably wouldn't have happened.
Yeah. Okay, amazing. All right, thank you, Daniele. That was amazing,
Cool.
and pleasure to talk to you.
Good talking to you. Thank you so much.